Thanks for tuning back into the Minutemen Initiative. Today we have the pleasure of having on Representative Sarah Vance of House District 6. She is a House representative here in Alaska and specifically out of the Homer area or Southern Kenai Peninsula. And today we're going to be getting into the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking here in Alaska specifically, but it's still a great episode if you don't live in Alaska. There's a lot of good information and good advice on how to get involved politically, especially at the local level, and specifically on the issue of human trafficking. So this is kind of a follow-up to the episode we did with Brad Dennis. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I encourage you to do so. In that episode, we talked about kind of the reality of human trafficking, what it looks like, and kind of the different avenues that it appears in. And then today we're going to kind of talk about the problem, the legislative problem, and some of the ways we can hopefully fix that. So I really hope you enjoy the episode, and a big thanks to Representative Sarah Vance and her team for making the time to come on the Minutemen Initiative. All right, so jumping straight into it, I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Representative Sarah Vance. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for being willing to come on our humble little podcast.
I'm excited.
Like, good.
I gotta say,
too.
You know, coming into your space here, where I'm surrounded by just all kinds of first responder trauma equipment and firearms. For guys who are training and equipping people to be Minutemen. How cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
I don't know.
We think it's cool.
Yeah.
Like,
we like
it's
it.
kind of like my little girl dreams. I'm a little odd for that. I'm a Second Amendment girl myself, and I play the good G.I. Joe. All right. But this is pretty cool. This is pretty amazing that you are just reaching people to take that responsibility, as our founders did. Mm-hmm. This is what America's about right here.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's something that we're passionate about it, obviously, but I think a lot could be learned from how the country was originally started and the responsibility that, the families had. It was a bunch of families, and they were little pockets of people out there trying to make their way and helped each other out, big sense of community, and I think some of that's gone away, unfortunately. So but I think it's coming back. I'm pretty optimistic that there's a lot of doom and gloom, especially in this culture. I feel like people are like, it's over, nothing matters, like my vote doesn't count. You hear all that kind of stuff, and I think that's wrong. I think it's absolutely some ways to get through a lot of this uncertainty that we're in right now. So
there were enough who believed in the cause, and I think that's where we're at again.
Yeah, I agree. That's good to hear from you too. So why politics? Why did Sarah Vance become Representative Sarah Vance?
Wow, before I became a legislator, I was a 24/7 stay-at-home homeschooling mother of four. Mm-hmm. I grew up here in Alaska from the age of 10, happily raising my family around the corner from my parents. Love my country, love my state, and was just feeling like, man, I gotta speak up. I gotta say something and do something. Love my kids. I didn't watch the news. Who needs that negativity in your life? I wasn't that person who followed any of that stuff. I didn't even know the name of my mayor in my small town of around 5,000 people. I just didn't, because again, it's usually not fun. It's usually the stuff that makes us angry. And there was a message came through of a friend that said, hey, our city council is bringing forth a resolution that is unconstitutional. It's anti-Trump. It's really breaking down the fabric of who we are, and they're trying to make our city a sanctuary city. And I read this resolution and said, oh, no. I got to say something. And there was about a dozen of us who met for lunch one day and were preparing who was going to speak at city council. Well, what we didn't know is that a whole lot of other people in town felt the same way that we did. And when we got there to the council meeting that night, more than 200 people had crowded into our small council chambers. Wow. I'm telling you, there were a lot of mad bubbas there that day. So I spoke. And the council said that no, they weren't trying to create a sanctuary city, and they had a different resolution before us. And I said, we can't unsee what you already proposed.
Yeah.
That's essentially lying to us. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out we made some FOIA requests. And we found out that there were members who were planning to make Homer a sanctuary city. And so we initiated a recall of half of our council members.
Wow.
We said, you at least need to be honest with us.
Yeah.
And it spurred a whole huge controversy. And along the way, I was chosen to be the voice of that recall. And I was kind of thrust into that position. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that was essentially a campaign. And I tell you, it was one of the most difficult things that I've ever been engaged in. Very, very challenging in the community. And, it showed me that we can take a lot of hits from outside and inside our circles.
Yeah.
But we have to choose whether we're going to get up and fight again.
Yeah.
There was one point that I was on public radio, and I was trying to explain the emotion that we felt by being lied to and deceived from our local representatives, our council members, and the person really turned the conversation around where it made me look like a monster. And there were people in the community who were so shaken by that later, when I went to a protest in the park and just wanting to connect with people and find out, what do you really think about this? Totally different situation. A woman was so afraid of me. She was literally shaking, talking to me because of the way that the public media had painted me.
Wow.
And so I knew that it was going to take a lot of healing.
Yeah.
After that, I was asked to run for state house. And I told him, I said, you're crazy. You are crazy. I said, I have so much to learn. My children are young. My youngest was 3 at the time.
Oh, man.
And I ran for city council. I knew that I had to show them that I wasn't afraid.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be bullied. And I lost. I lost so bad. I lost that race.
No.
Oh, man. I got spanked. My husband was so relieved because he did. He did not feel that was my place, and I cried for about 3 days.
Oh.
And then I picked myself up, and I said, "Well, if I'm not supposed to be here, Lord, where do you want me?" And went back home, and I just started praying for my city. And by that December, I got another phone call and said, "Sarah, we'd really like you to consider running for the legislature." And I said, I'm humbled. I really am. But I don't know what I'm doing. And my children are young. I don't think I can do this. He said, I respect your decision. However, I highly disagree. Well, that was my local district chairman of the Republican Party. And I thought, man, why does he think I can do this? And I hung up the phone and I look at my husband and he goes, Sarah, I think we can do this. It was at that moment that I thought, well, if my husband thinks we can do this, then maybe I can do anything.
Yeah.
So we just took it one step at a time. I'd never been engaged in politics, the Republican Party, any of that. I'm a good American. I vote.
Yeah.
But I didn't go much deeper than that.
Right.
So I started getting involved, and the Republican chair of the state of Alaska gave me a 1% shot at winning. It was great. I give him a hard time about that all the time. And when he told me that, I said, okay, what do I need to do to move that needle? And so I started working hard at getting to know my district, being where everyone was, listening to them and saying, what are your top issues? I didn't go to them and say, this is my platform. I said, what do you want me to take action on?
Yeah.
And just really stood upon my values and principles that I share with our founding fathers, right? We are supposed to have individual responsibility as a free nation and take action ourselves. And I said I would do that. I'll uphold the Constitution for you. And I tell you what, I just garnered so much support, and I won really well that first year against a 16-year incumbent. They had no idea what's coming.
Yeah.
And the reason that I'm taking a few minutes to talk about this is that most of the time we feel like we can't. We think we're not qualified. I didn't know a lick, okay? And when I felt like, God was saying, no, you can do this. I got you. I said, Lord, I don't know anything. He said, that's all right. I do.
Yeah.
Okay. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to listen and learn. So I just started showing up. I showed up to my council meetings for a full year. Every time they met, I was there. They were so tired of me. I started watching, the legislative sessions, things like that.
Yeah.
But I really connected with people and was listening to them.
Right.
And started reading the Constitution, our state Constitution. I've handed out more state constitutions and federal constitutions you can shake a stick at. And that became something that I'm known by because I said, this is our foundation. This is where we need to move from. This is our Bible when it comes to government.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage you, wherever you are, whatever you feel like you may be inclined to get involved in, whether that's school board, local council, state government, a board, a commission, and you're like, man, I don't know. It's worth it because we need good people who believe in the values of our founding fathers, who believe in our country and want to set things right again. And so often we don't even show up because we feel that we're not able to do it.
Yeah.
And I was a stay-at-home mom, 4 children, youngest was 3. And here I am, 5 years later, and still doing it. So, I say that anybody can do this. That was the design.
Yeah.
That was the design.
That's what makes it so beautiful and unique to, I think, to a lot of other countries, is that it can literally be anybody. And we preach it a lot on this podcast to people. Like, if you are, especially looking at like people being ready and, I'm investing in gear, I'm storing up equipment, I'm, coordinating in a community. If you're doing all those things, but you're not involved in your local politics, then you're missing the big picture. As simple as like being willing to write an email to your representative and let them know your stance and start communications with them. Make a phone call to your representative's office. Like, you're an approachable, normal person. You're not some, unapproachable, scary figure that someone can't just talk to, And I think sometimes people either think that or it's the other way, where they don't feel that they can be heard, which it's unfortunate that we've got to that point where so many people feel like their vote doesn't matter or their voice means nothing. But I think it's very much the opposite. I think people have fallen into complacency with those kinds of mentalities, and when we need to be being louder now, like people need to start speaking up more and being more involved.
Well, and I know people who have won elections by one vote. And that's that crazy. One vote, they knew who it was because the number was challenged to see how accurate it was, and they found who that one vote was, and it happened to be a felon.
Really?
And it was memorable because the colleague, Bart Laban from Fairbanks, he told me, he goes, I was door knocking, and here was a guy walking his cat. He goes, I remember that. It's, not every day you see someone walking a cat on a leash. And, right?
Yeah.
Hey, these stories happen. And
I would have avoided that person. No.
But he was like, hey, how you doing? And the guy's like, well, I don't know that I can vote because, I'm a felon. And he goes, well, if your rights, if you have paid your due to society, after a certain period of time, your rights have been restored where you can vote again. And so he gave him the address and location where he could go and register and make sure that he still had that opportunity. Well, the man did it.
That's cool.
The man did it, and he cast his vote for Bart LeBon, which was the deciding vote. So I'm telling you, does your vote matter? Absolutely, it matters. Absolutely. And maybe you did some things in the past that you aren't proud of. Go see if your rights to vote have been restored. Maybe that time has passed and you just haven't exercised that. I'm telling you, that is so incredibly powerful. And this is what sets us apart from other nations, is that you can have that restored to you, and it's powerful.
Yeah.
So when along the way in your service did you get into the human trafficking side of things, which is kind of the big topic we want to talk about with you today?
Well, this year has definitely been the year that everything shifted. My entire tenure, I've been trying to push the door open regarding human trafficking. Most people have a story about this one defining moment where they decided that trafficking was going to be the area that they pursue. And I keep trying to reflect back. When was that deciding moment for me? But it goes beyond just trafficking for me. One of my dearest friends was abused as a child. And just walking through some of that with her, alongside her. And the most recent trauma has been, 15 years ago now. She was in a bad relationship with a guy. And through the process of healing, she had to come to realize that, and I apologize, I didn't ask if we can, if our words and speech are unfiltered on your podcast.
Oh yeah, you can.
Okay.
You can.
So
you don't have to hold back at all.
She had to realize, and this is hard. This is really hard for a lot of people. Is that she had to admit that the circumstances she was in is that she was actually raped. And I had never been in any type of situation, never been abused. I came from a stellar family that never had any of that. And unfortunately, so many of our women, actually 59% of our women in Alaska have been abused in some form. Third of our kids have been sexually abused. That's not a story. My story is not everyone's story. And my best friend was one of them. And so I was walking through this healing with her, but it was always like this was her. I never reflected that that's who she was. She was always that victor. She was never a victim in this, but it was still a process of healing that she was walking through. And that defining moment came at such an unexpected time. I was watching the Masterpiece Theater show, Downton Abbey. And there was a pretty strong scene in there where one of the women that everybody considered a sister, loved her, gentle heart, good person on this program, was brutally raped. And I could not shake that episode for days. And I remember distinctively pulling up into my driveway and saying, God, why can I not get this TV show out of my head?
Yeah.
It's not as if she's and that's where the Lord finished my sentence. He said, your best friend. And I tell you, that's when the bucket of cold water was thrown in my face. That suddenly I got the fullness that it was my friend who had been raped.
Yeah.
Walking through her experience, I never really brought it as close to home. And that's when I realized that so many of us have a sister, a friend, an aunt, a mother who's been abused. And we just aren't bringing it close to home. And so therefore we're not doing anything about it. We're not connecting with them in their process of healing. And that's when it changed for me. That's when everything became real. And my friend loved it that I never looked at her as a victim, that I never identified that experience as to who she was and who our friendship was, that's not the answer. But it became a lot closer to home upon that realization of the emotion involved in it and just really what her experience was.
Right.
So you fast forward this into me picking up the cause of trafficking in the legislature. Governor Dunleavy introduced his bill his first term, the first couple of years, my first term, and the bill was never moved out of House Judiciary. It never saw the light of day. The Senate moved on it a little bit, but it never got handed over to the House. Did not see that movement. It just died in committee. No one talked about it. It rarely got addressed by the media. And I kept going to the chair of House Judiciary saying, come on, we got to move on this. Can we at least get our definition of human trafficking up with the federal level that involves force, fraud, and coercion? Well, Sarah, give me a model bill. And I kept going to work with the Department of Law and our legal services in the legislature saying, hey, can we do this? No, we can't do that. I would hit a wall every time I would try to make a change. Well, this year I became the chair of House Judiciary, and I said, we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna be loud and proud, and I'm going to create a groundswell from the public that we are going to move this bill. So I created a Justice and Human Trafficking Week in the legislature, and I invited the troopers and the Governor's Council on Human Sex Trafficking to come and give their report. The first report for Alaska of its kind was released in March.
Of this year.
March of this year. Wow. And then I also brought in boots on the ground organizations, Priceless Alaska and My House, who brings in runaway youth, and had them talk about their experience and what they see. And then the final day of that week, I had survivors of human trafficking, Alaskans, come and talk. One woman did come into committee, brave woman, I tell you, to come before the legislature to tell her story. And then I had a couple others online tell their story. And it was sobering. I have quite a few veterans, combat veterans, in my committee, and they were rendered speechless to what we were told.
I started listening to those testimonies, and I haven't made it all the way through them yet, but it's intense. I mean, it's heavy stuff.
It is heavy stuff. I got the full realization from listening to their stories that these are crimes against humanity.
Yeah, 100%.
Like crimes against humanity. And when we start equating the words human and sex trafficking to modern day slavery and crimes against humanity that are just barbaric, then maybe we will understand the brevity of the problem.
Yeah, so I guess kind of bouncing off of that, because I think it's a good spot to segue, because you might be hearing all this and listening, and you might be wondering, like, okay, well, aren't we aware of human trafficking? But I think, and this is kind of going to be Alaska specific, so keep that in mind, but I think it's important, especially for all the listeners we have here in Alaska, to know, like, what are we actually seeing? Why is this something we need to actually make a move on and make a change? Because the numbers are staggering. And
to add to that, though, also, even if you're not in Alaska, to start researching what your current state has put forward as far as, like, is it at least to the federal level or even surpassing that? Hopefully so. But, I feel like it's, an individual's responsibility to look at, like, what their current state is doing about the human trafficking issue. So, yeah. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you want to start getting into kind of what do we see, what's the statistics? What are we seeing in Alaska specifically? And tell us how bad it really is, because it's pretty mind blowing, and I think it's gonna make people pretty confused at why someone like yourself hasn't come along before. And maybe to follow up to that, if you want, like, I don't know. We were kind of talking before the podcast about how it seems abnormal that a representative would be so involved in this, and I think that's unfortunate that it seems that way. And I'm thankful that you are involved in this and you know as much as you do. But So yeah, however you want to tackle that, I think I just gave you a lot of stuff. But if you just want to get into what we're actually the situation we're actually in as Alaskans in this issue and how important the change is to make.
Well, let's go big picture and then narrow it down. Big picture is that there are more than 27 million people currently being trafficked in the world today. 27 million. More people in human slavery today than ever in history. Wrap your brain around that.
Yeah, it's wild.
It is at least $150 billion industry globally. And that was numbers from 2017, I believe. And in looking at, I was trying to get you specific numbers for your listeners as Minutemen, 2A, self-defense, taking care of your family. And human trafficking has far surpassed the small arms, the illegal small arms trade. Well past that. It has not yet surpassed the drug trade, but it is on its way. I couldn't find newer numbers based upon what I've heard, but human trafficking, the traffickers have found that it's really convenient for the human commodity to help them in their illegal arms and drugs trade as well. Right. It's a lot easier to smuggle something through an individual than it is, shipping containers, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate side of it, but we just haven't really wrapped our brain around how this is a growing trend, and it's right in our face. The United States is the number one buyer. We have the highest demand for sex trafficking.
Really?
Now there is human trafficking is the umbrella for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. They are distinct, but the United States really caters to sex trafficking, and we need to admit that and know that it's not just in the big cities. It is very much an Alaska problem, and the trouble is finding the exact numbers in Alaska, because this report was the first of its kind in Alaska this year. I have some numbers that are kind of specific to different organizations, but our definite numbers for big picture Alaska is challenging to find right now, because we're working on people using the same definitions, identifying what trafficking really is, because a lot of times when it's reported or what someone thinks they see, they call it domestic violence or prostitution. And it may, in fact, be trafficking. So before we get into that, let's talk about these definitions, because I think that's important. So I'm going to see if I can find the definitions that the Governor's Council is using here. Trafficking victims, persons who have been subjected to sex trafficking in which commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, and they weren't 18 years of age. Anything below 18, or really the age of 20, is just automatic child abuse.
Yeah.
And you are going to be prosecuted in a different category. But also trafficking of victims includes the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, and obtaining a person for labor, services, involuntary servitude, things like that. In Alaska, we see it in the nail salon industry, of all people. They came to the Department of Law and said, you got to help us out. Fishing is one of them that we see, the labor trafficking. So those are kind of some of the areas that you would see it. Now, human trafficking does not always mean that it is smuggling.
Okay.
It's not always that. So back to the story of my close friend. In this process of learning about it, she was reflecting upon this relationship that she had to admit that she knows she was raped. But then in looking at what all of the indicators are of someone who is being trafficked, the trafficker, most cases will become a Romeo. They will exploit a vulnerable person and start filling a need. They'll say, man, you know, boy, that's an amazing beard. You know, does anybody tell you that? Does anybody tell you?
Well, thank you.
I mean, you know, and they'll start to really romance this person and meet their needs, and they're very patient in their process. And once they start building that relationship, they build the trust, they fill the need, a void that person has in their life. And then they begin to isolate them from their family and friends. And it's a lot of mind manipulation where they get them to where they aren't trusting those same relationships anymore. And that person then becomes the one who will provide for their needs, whether that's a place to stay. And in my friend's case, she was at just a kind of a low, depressing point in her life.
Yeah.
And with the involvement with this guy, she ended up losing her job. And he says, "Don't worry, I got you. You can come live with me. I'll take care of you." So she didn't have any place to go. She didn't have any place to live. The people in church were not helping her. Man. And so she went to live with this man, which was not her norm.
Right.
And it was soon very clear that there was going to be an exchange for services to live in his house. And then he had her deal. He had a business. He was an upstanding guy. He was involved in his church, had a small business in town. Well, she ended up having to make cash deposits for him and be very specific on what these different engagements were going to be. If he did not do the various tasks that he wanted of her, that included a lot of terrible sexual activity, he would point to his guns, and he used that veiled threat of harm to get her to comply. All the while she was saying, "No, this isn't right. How can I get out?" And that's exactly what these traffickers use. And now looking at what the succession of these relationships look like, she checked off every one on that list except for being exploited. Because she got out. She realized that he had other fiancés. He had promised marriage. They were engaged, but he never would let her wear the wedding ring. It was going to be sized, but it was sitting there on the shelf for her to see as a false hope.
Oh, wow.
And this happened right in Homer.
Yeah.
She went to leadership of the church. "Oh no, he's a great guy. He was involved with the youth." These are not the typical pimps that you would see on TV shows.
Right.
And that's the danger of this is happening right in our small towns and we don't even know it. And she had no idea what was happening to her because she didn't know the signs of it. She didn't know what coercion looked like. It's a very slow, deliberate manipulation to get these typically women to comply, where they then have no other place to go. They have no other trusting relationships in their mind, and so they're trapped.
Yeah.
And the staggering number for Alaska is that one out of more than 5,000, about 5,000 people are trafficked in Alaska. That's 20 times the number in California.
That's crazy.
20 times the number.
1 out of 5,000 people.
Let me get that exact number. It's 5,000-ish.
Okay.
I would just say ish. But in California,
That's huge
1 out of
still.
108,000 people are trafficked. In Alaska, 1 in 5,852.
Holy smokes.
I mean, think about the size. I mean, Homer, the city limits of Homer is about 5,000 people. That means that, statistically speaking, there is someone being trafficked right in my small town.
Yeah.
45% of those victims will be Alaska Native. 45%.
That's huge.
We know that more than 44% of homeless teens have been trafficked.
44%?
44% in Alaska. Homeless teens. And that this has really kind of rocked my thinking about the homeless. It's really easy for us to dismiss this, right?
Yeah.
But let's think about kids. And we learned this from our training, that kids are either running from something or to something, right? And in Alaska, a lot of times they are running from a bad home life.
Yeah.
There's more abuse going on in the home that they would rather risk it, out in the community.
Right.
And
just take their chances out there.
They want to take their chances. And here on the Kenai Peninsula, we have about 52,000 people in the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And from 2019 numbers, the estimates of homeless on the Kenai Peninsula, this is pre-pandemic, 895 people.
Wow.
261 of them are in the school district. So they are registered within the school. There's just over 8,000 kids in our schools. 261 of them in 2019 were homeless.
That's crazy.
And so we know that 44% of them have been trafficked. Suddenly, homelessness is an issue I care about.
Yeah.
Because this is, as I was looking through the governor's report last night, just trying to refresh myself on the numbers, there was one statistic that it shook me. I'm always surprised at what it's going to be, because we're learning about some pretty awful things, and I try to stay sober-minded about it so that I can do what I need to do to write good law. But there was one that got me yesterday. And it was the data talking about the juvenile justice people that are specifically in DJJ, and they have been asked about trauma, taking it in, and I am having trouble finding. Here we go. The question that was asked to them, there was about 500 who were specifically in Department of Juvenile Justice. They've committed some crime. About 500 of them were asked this question: have you ever traded sex for anything, such as food, shelter, drugs, alcohol, or a ride? In 2022, 448 of them said yes.
That's crazy. Out of 500.
500. Here's this is on the governor's report. Out of those that are just within our juvenile justice system, 448 of our kids traded sex for the most basic necessity of life. If you want a definition of evil, is asking a child to trade sex for a place to sleep, some food, or maybe a ride to school.
Yeah.
Suddenly I care about the homeless.
Yeah. I mean, that's staggering.
These are Alaska kids.
Right.
Alaska, where we have maybe 740,000 people. Everybody's small town.
Yep.
We know what's going on in our town.
Yeah, not this, right?
Not this.
Yeah. That's the biggest kind of wall I've ran into since I took the class with Brad, which is, you were in the class as well.
Yes, amazing.
Which, yeah, it was great to see you there, and it was all these numbers, and you start to see through, what I think everybody knows is there, but it's either you have kind of a cognitive dissonance where you're just like, yeah, it doesn't fit what I'm worried about right now, or you're just like, I don't really want to know. Like, I know it's there, but I'm kind of scared to know. Or you do want to know, but the information's not readily available, and it really isn't. It's weird. It's kind of hard to find and track down. And that's kind of, I would put myself in that last category where I was like, yeah, I'm going to come take this class because I know it's a lot worse than what I'm being told. But then you go through the, numbers and hear the real stories and all the different things, and then you leave there wanting to tell everybody. And there's so many people I'm sitting there telling, and they're like, yeah, that's bad, but we live in a good community. It's not happening here. It's like, no, you don't understand. It's literally happening here. Like, it's happening right now. And that's hard for people to grasp, that it's happening in their even the smallest of communities.
It's sobering.
Yeah.
The one of the survivors that I had come and give testimony in House Judiciary was from Soldotna. Right
Crazy.
here.
Yep.
Right here, your own backyard.
Yep.
Never would have thought it was here.
Yep.
I would consider Soldotna as kind of white middle class America, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
For the most part.
Traditional. Yeah.
Right. And
Lots of busy people here.
that's where she came from.
Yeah.
I know another mom whose daughter met a trafficker and was taking him to, like, church groups and youth group and stuff.
Crazy.
They are very patient, but they're deliberate. The mind games are astounding, and so many of our kids are facing this. Here's another number that I think is important, and I'll connect the dots. Is the CDC does a survey every couple of years of our high school youth for mental health questions and things like that, and they asked, how many of you have thought about suicide? How many of you have a plan for suicide? Is one of the questions. And the report that came back this last year was that 1 in 4 Alaskan girls have a plan to commit suicide.
That's crazy.
I have 2 daughters. And I thought, well, they just have a few that are really tight in their circle. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, my girls have, what's the number of that tight circle? It's usually going to be 4 of them, 3 or 4, right?
Yeah.
And that's when it hit me. As a mama, I said, statistically, that means 1 of them has a plan.
Yeah.
Why in the world would these girls have a plan to commit suicide? COVID got them down, right? No, it has to do with what is referred to as sextortion and bullying. Well, when I found that out, I said, wait a minute. I asked Gwen Adams, founder of Priceless Alaska, who has an organization that works directly with victims of trafficking. And I asked her, I said, what is the number 1 driver of human trafficking in Alaska? Without hesitation, she said, it is the unsupervised online activity of our youth. Okay, hold on. Whoa. Because most traffickers are recruiting their victims online now. Facebook is a hotbed. All of the platforms, really. Gaming, they start building those relationships. They can start. A lot of these kids think that it's someone their age.
Yep.
And then they start, getting a little sexual in nature in their conversation. Sexting, it's called. But then they start asking for photos. And this young girl is suddenly swapping photos with this individual. And by then, that trafficker knows everything about this girl and her family. So then they get these photos and say, well, I need you to do this. And they say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And Priceless has a story of a 14-year-old girl right here in Soldotna who met someone on the game Animal Jam. Are you familiar with Animal Jam? I have kids. I have kids. It's a cute little fluffy little kitties, and you set up all these little, fun things. Well, she started chatting with another 14-year-old boy on there that loved Animal Jam. And he says, hey, why don't you, we've had fun playing this game. Let's move over to this other platform with this other cool game. Starts building a relationship with her. And gets these images of her and blackmails her. What is now legally referred to as sextortion, and says, if you don't do this for me, I'm gonna post these pictures all over your dad's work, all over your school. And so in order to protect herself and her family, she does what is asked of her. This particular victim was going to a hotel, rendering service, making the transaction, putting the money in the account, and she had never seen her trafficker.
Wow. All handled online.
All handled online. So that's trafficking that happened online through sextortion and things like that. That is the exact same avenue that our kids are facing with each other, with other people, with the bullying, with swapping these photos and saying, hey, I'm going to tell everybody in high school if you don't do this for me. And the girls try to get out of the situation, somehow the shame that's involved, and a lot of these girls end up committing suicide. So it's the exact same highway that we're seeing an increase in suicide among our youth and those being trafficked.
Directly related then.
Directly related.
Yeah. Man. So how does, kind of looking at, we talked about the big picture, talking about some specific instances and some different statistics that come up in the state. How does Alaska compare to the rest of the nation? Where are we at as a state in comparison to other states?
Well, our numbers are pretty shocking, as I showed. We are 20 times per capita, versus California as for those being trafficked. Our kids have a higher level of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and on this governor's report, some of them have the list of how many ACEs are in the demographic that they service, and the more ACEs you have, the more vulnerable you are to being exploited. Alaska kids, there's at least 70 to 80% of those in the foster care system will be trafficked or have been. And our OCS is a hot mess.
Yeah.
Our kids, because of ACEs, deal with, if you have divorced parents, if there's alcoholism, drugs in the family, there's all these different qualifiers.
Yeah.
Our traffickers consider Alaskans pre-groomed because of all of these ACEs. That means that they're more vulnerable. It's going to be easier to coerce them and manipulate them because of all the sexual abuse. Alaska has the highest rate of rape and sexual assault in the nation. We are 2.5 times the national average.
Crazy.
If we were to cut that number in half, we're still number 1. So when you factor that in to a trafficker, he's like, okay, so she's already damaged goods. Then I can get her to do what I want that much easier.
Yeah.
He doesn't have as many walls to have to knock down, right? Our laws defending these victims, bringing justice, is extremely lackluster. It's this is where I get super passionate and why I've tried to knock on this door for the last 5 years, when I realized that our human trafficking laws are in the same place as prostitution and indecency in the community.
What?
Same place.
Are those, and what kind of charges are those?
Now it is, someone who's trafficked can get, 25 to 35 years currently, but it's very, very vague. It's not defined. There haven't been a whole lot of state prosecutions. A lot of them are federal because the first federal law against trafficking passed in 2020 that set that definition that involves force, fraud, and coercion. Alaska law does not involve all of those things. And this is kind of what my mission is, besides educating the public to how bad it is that we pass House Bill 68, this bill that was originally proposed by the governor. I worked on it for at least 9 committee hearings, trying to strengthen it to be able to pass and provide justice to these victims. This is a crime bill.
Yeah. What? Trying to figure out how to even well, why has it been so, like you mentioned earlier, that it was a governor's bill, it just died, it sat there and died. You've been working on this for so long, like where's all the, why is there so much pushback or so much reluctance to allow something like this to go forward, when it seems like something that's going to make it a lot, not just harder to get away with it, but you're going to be hit with way stronger charges and consequences for getting caught with doing it. So why is that a problem?
Well, there's a couple of things at play, and one of them is that a Republican governor introduced the bill. Simply because his name is on it. There are people in the legislature who do not want him to get good credit for anything.
So it's just nonsense. It's
Absolute
political
nonsense.
games that don't matter at all.
The other factor at play is there's one chairman who is really reluctant to pass what we would consider strong crime bills because he doesn't want more people to go to prison.
Okay.
Our prisons are full. Our Justice Department is, beyond capacity, and this would just create more hardship. And after all, human trafficking is dealt with at the federal level.
Oh, so he's passing the buck, basically, or
Yes.
trying to.
Yes.
Yeah, but just because it's done at the federal level, you still need local law enforcement to act on what's going on in small towns. Like, there's not enough federal resources to, like, keep people in check. So I feel like by making actual state law, then it allows troopers and local police departments to actually do their job.
Yes. Our law enforcement can only enforce the law that's there. If it's not there,
Law enforcement.
law enforcement, right? And I'm telling you, this area is lackluster. The human trafficking laws are in the section of law that is a crime against a community, where the bill moves it to crime against an individual. And that's very different in criminal law, because this would hold people accountable, especially sex trafficking, for sex crimes. And in Alaska, we take that very seriously, and they would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And that's what this bill does. One of the things that I specifically worked on was separating the language of prostitution from that of sex trafficking, and we also define labor trafficking in there. And that was all muddled in together, and they're not always the same thing. There are individuals who choose prostitution and they act singularly, meaning there's only two people in that exchange. There's someone rendering a service and someone paying for that service. So that's two people. When a third person comes into the mix and is then profiting from that transaction, that's trafficking.
Yeah.
Now, there's also trafficking in the sense of what we talked about with the homeless kids, of trading sex for
A place
to stay or whatever. That is trafficking, okay?
Yeah.
Maybe $1 wasn't exchanged, but anything of value, and that is written into the current law that's being proposed, anything of value.
But that's not in the law right now.
It is not in the law right now. But a lot of times we muddle prostitution and human trafficking. And I was doing that this year when I was working on the bill, and I had to make that distinction that it's not always the same. And separated that out. When I did that, I immediately received bipartisan support because I made it very, very clear in law that they were two very distinct offenses, and we were going to treat them differently. So there's a lot of positive movement on the bill. It still has some large hurdles, but some of the things that it does, because I said, okay, this is our one shot. This law hasn't been amended for a very, very long time. As far as I know, my entire lifetime. They may have had another little update, but prostitution was enacted, that area of law was enacted the year before that I was born. Now, when the human trafficking lines in it, which is very vague, was added, I haven't looked at that, but it's not thorough. So what House Bill 68 does, it's specifically the crime of sex and human trafficking, increases penalties for all forms of trafficking. It provides legal protection for the victims, establishes a new crime of patron of a victim of sex trafficking to target the buyers, because that's something that wasn't really there. So I really wanted to encourage law enforcement, start going after the Johns.
Yeah.
It is worth your time. So if under this proposal, if a John has been convicted at least 3 times in the last 5 years of buying, then it raises that penalty up to a felony. That starts saying, you're a frequent flyer, we're not going to reward you for that.
Yeah.
It also revokes business licenses, teachers, professional license from felony sex trafficking convictions. So it says you will you will never be able to teach in Alaska again. If you're convicted of trafficking people, especially our children, we take that very, very seriously.
So hold on, I got to pause right there, because you're saying that's in House Bill 68.
Yes.
So that's not currently something under Alaska law now.
Correct.
So you can get charged with human trafficking and maintain your licensing.
You would likely be brought before the licensing board, but it is not.
But it's not like a law automatic.
It is not an automatic revocation.
That's wild to me.
So this is what we learned in the process of asking these questions on the bill from our licensing boards, our professional boards, saying, okay, what kind of questions do you ask when someone's wanting a license to do business here in the state of Alaska? A professional license.
Yeah.
A doctor, a teacher, things like that. And we found out that they don't have a box to check if you've been convicted of felonies.
That's crazy.
Right? That's what we thought. So I'm telling you, this bill is like 60 pages long because we added that. We said, I looked at the areas of professions that have a personal relationship in nature. A doctor, a counselor, a teacher, physical therapist, right? Where they're going to have a hands-on, real trusted relationship with an individual.
Yeah.
And said, licensing board, you need to start asking these questions on intake. And there are certain ones that if you have any trafficking convictions, we're going to remove your license and you never get it again.
Yeah.
Like you had one shot. You're involved in the slave trade. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get to be a teacher now. Like
there's
that
there's
doesn't
no
make any
1,
sense.
2, 3, strikes you're out. This is the one shot to do it right in humanity. You ruined it. Tough luck.
Yeah.
It also, we did also include bus drivers with that, because we were thinking through where's some of the most vulnerable in the trusted positions. It also expands age-appropriate education curriculum to include trafficking and safe online practices. It's traditionally a crime bill, but I put that in there because when we're talking about this issue, it's so overwhelming. And we keep talking about, this crime bill only would impact those who have been prosecuted. It's at the end. But what about at the beginning?
Yeah.
How can we equip our kids to be able to spot what I call a bad tomato? To teach our kids that discernment. And this is really what the Minutemen are about, right? Is being able to equip your family to go, that person right there, those actions, there's just something about it.
Yeah.
Listen to your gut.
Yeah.
Listen to your gut. Hey, I just talked to a recently elected school board here on the peninsula, and I was telling her what some of the signs of trafficking are, and she goes, oh my goodness, my friend's daughter is being trafficked right now. They got her addicted to drugs, and she's trading services. Do you have a number that this mom can call? Absolutely. And I want to give that to your listeners today. We have the National Human Trafficking Hotline that if you're like, man, there's just some things that I see that just isn't right. I just want to know if what I'm seeing is it. You can contact the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, their hotline, at 1-888-373-7888. You can find that number online, or you can text BEFREE. You can put the word info in there and they will provide info, or you can make a report. That's 233-733 is the text number, and it spells BEFREE. You can get information. If you're like, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to call the police, I might be overreacting, you can get information that can help you.
Yeah.
And I think the more people spot the signs and they see it, they start to know, they're going to start to see it in a whole lot of places that they didn't think. But the educational aspect of this encourages schools to have in their curriculum safe online practices that's age appropriate and trauma informed, so that our kids can know what a safe adult looks like, what a non-safe adult. What do? They don't keep secrets.
Right.
They don't tell you keep the secret. It's just between us.
Mm-hmm.
They don't threaten harm.
Yeah.
Right. We need to start having these conversations with our kids because they're learning it. When you look at the age group that priceless has serviced for victims of trafficking. The youngest is age 9.
That's crazy.
The oldest is 47.
Wow.
It is not what we typically think. Yep, age at entry, 9 years of age to 47 years of age.
That's such a vast age gap. Like and then so every age in between is what that means,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's crazy.
So out of, Priceless Alaska is our first and I believe our only organization who assists those who are trafficked. They've served 223 victims who have gone through that process. 100% of them report a history of sexual abuse as a child.
100%?
100%. 100% of them have disconnected family relationships. Nearly 100% identify a family member as a source of abuse.
Yeah.
Right? There's just staggering numbers, but it really reminds us how important our family relationships are.
Yeah.
How important our community relationships are. And being there.
Mm-hmm.
Being there for kids.
Yep.
And I think that's what the Minutemen Initiative is about, is being there for your neighbor, being that defense, being that safe place that someone can run to. And sometimes it means that neighborhood kid that always hangs out, maybe they don't have any other safe place to go to.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have that person that will take the time and listen to what they did that day, or the fact that they think that bicycle's cool. And I have a 9-year-old and he knows every kid in the neighborhood, the name of their dog, and he wants to tell me about the neighbors have chickens and the names of their chickens and all this kind of stuff, and we need to listen to those things, because in that time is when they start telling us about the other things that they see, the other things that they experience. So many kids don't have that person that will be that defense for them. Yeah.
Yep, you're spot on, and it starts now. I think it's something that, can be done right now. A lot of the different preparations and training and different things like that so many focus on, especially in our audience. It's like, what ifs, a lot of what if scenarios, which is fine, but this is something that is happening. It's not a what if, it's when.
Yes.
Where, these are things that are going on right now, and it's things that I think so much of our society has dropped the ball. It's an area that the church, I think, has dropped the ball. If you go to church and you have a local church community, encourage them to be more involved. This is an area that I think the church could make a big difference.
Absolutely.
But individually, we just need to be more involved. So kind of jumping back off of that into House Bill 68, what are ways we can help, more specifically Alaskans, but what are you needing from the Alaska people to get this thing going and support this bill?
Alaskans need to contact your representative and tell them that this is important, that we need to pass it this next session. It needs to be strong. It needs to be sound. Don't gut the bill. But you can do that by specifically sending an email to house.finance@akleg.gov. You can look online. Alaska Legislature has a website, and at the top bar, you can put HB 68 and search it, and it shows what committee it's in. That you can just email those members right there who are on it. Super interactive. We have a great website that's easy to find stuff. You can follow everything about that bill. You can read it and take a look at it. Talk to your friends about this. It's so important. And I tell you that you were talking at the beginning about the importance of making that phone call and sending the letters and the emails to your representative. And a lot of times we feel like it's just going to go off into this abyss and that it won't be seen and it won't be taken into account. That's simply not true in Alaska. each representative represents about 18,000 people. And when we receive emails or phone calls, we read them. For the most part, we read every word. At least I do. And when it comes in for a bill, I have sat in committee during public testimony where people are calling in for or against a specific piece of legislation, and members are making check marks on their page of yeses and nos. And if they don't know a lot about a specific issue, they will vote according to how many chits leaned one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, you represent the people that you're... So I feel like that makes sense, you know? So if people want to be heard, they need to actually speak up.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes. Because I tell you, on that bill, I can tell you who did call in.
Yeah.
It was the prostitutes. And they identified themselves as prostitutes. So I'm not trying to be degrading here.
Yeah.
But they clearly said, this is before I had gotten back the committee substitute where I had separated out the prostitution language. We were in the process of that. And they said, you're trying to kill our industry. This is our business. How dare you? You know, we're choosing to do this. This is free market. I had 20 callers that day, and there were 17 prostitutes who called in.
Wow.
So where are the freedom-loving Americans who want to end human slavery in Alaska?
Too busy with their heads in the sand.
Well, and
doing their own thing.
Just not knowing. And I think a lot of it, too, and just to be frank, a lot of freedom-loving Americans don't like the idea of new legislation, I think.
Sure.
So it's, you know, actually understanding the issue and realizing that there's bills, there is a time for, you know, legislative action. And it's when you have something as heinous as this. That's the thing. It's not just like well, that happens. It's like, no, this is a heinous crime against humanity. And I believe God has instituted government to, you know, it talks about it in Romans, to be just and to punish the evil and to reward good.
Yes.
It talks about that in Romans. And I believe that is true. And I think some political individuals are very far from that, but there's still great ones that are doing the right thing, and we need to pay attention and be involved and actually read through this stuff, which I will admit, it's a very big bill. I've been reading through it, and it's several pages, so a lot of it is lots of legal language that's like, what? But it's understandable, but it's, I guess what I'm saying is, be ready on a lot of these bills. That's just the way they are. You know, you have to put on your studious hat and go through it with a fine tooth comb. But I think it's something that everyone needs to be doing. It's a responsibility that we've been avoiding, and when I say we, I'm including myself, for too long. Just kind of guessing and accepting, like, it'll get taken care of, you know. But that's not the way it works.
Well, and a lot of it is that we assume that law already existed.
Yeah, I think I was kind of blown away the fact that there wasn't much there to begin with. Because you would think, like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that's illegal. And then upon further research, obviously you find out, like, oh wait, maybe not.
Well, you know, it didn't become federal law until 2020.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Because we didn't define it. And in order for, our law enforcement to be able to bring charges, it has to be based on the law. And then those charges have to be proven in court, right? We have due process. And it has to be strong enough because they have all of this other that they have to take into account. Well, if it's not going to be strong enough for a conviction, then most likely that victim is not going to take that risk because it's great. And they're putting a lot on the line to trust law enforcement to be able to handle this case and bring justice to them. And if they don't have laws behind them, then our victims are not going to say anything. And that's what we're working to change. Is we have a lot of trust building to do on many fronts, but from my perspective, is that we have to start by providing a good foundation in law that says, no, we're going to back you. We're going to prosecute these guys who are engaged in trafficking and trading people as a commodity. And we are going to throw the book at them, especially children. I'm telling you, I didn't have any argument from anyone about what should be done to those who traffic children. So it's something that is very unifying, but just letting people know it really does matter. We have someone in town who has contacted the local assembly members and said, you need to have a resolution in support of this. And I tell you, that's just as powerful by contacting your local government to say, would you have a resolution in support of this bill? Because it creates a local conversation of support and acknowledgement of, oh my goodness, this is happening here, and we as our local government want to show support of this bill. That's powerful, because legislators then have the backing of their community at home on that municipal level that says we're gonna do something about this. And that's a conversation that I'm having right here with a Kenai Peninsula Borough Assembly member.
Good. What kind of advice would you give to non-Alaskans, people that don't live here but are interested in being involved in this fight in other states? What would you kind of tell them, and where to start as far as getting involved?
Well, I'll tell you, there's movement across every state and different, degrees of activity. And not all states have a governor's council that is looking specifically into it. A lot of them do. A lot of these states are doing some incredible work in providing resources for the survivors and really working to educate and stop it before it starts. So you just need to find out, what your local government is doing. You can just do a quick search, human trafficking in Texas. And most likely some of the sites will pop up. You can put state of Texas human trafficking, find out what their laws are, get the numbers. Pretty quick Google search, whatever search engine, a lot of that stuff should come to the top, and find out. But the number one thing that you can do is equip yourself to be the eyes and ears. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline has a website, and it has the signs of trafficking, what it looks like, how to spot it, and then what to do. And so when you know that, then you're going to be able to be the eyes and ears for law enforcement. You're going to be the eyes and ears for that person who's in their time of need. Some of them, some of the red flags are someone has suddenly withdrawn from trusted family and friends. Overly controlling partner, that boyfriend that just seems to always want to be in her business. And they're always connected to their device. Like, they won't get away from the phone. They're always texting this person. It becomes very private. They're submissive and fearful. Maybe you're seeing more sexual activity in that individual. Maybe some addictions are really skyrocketing. Or if they're being labor trafficked, they're not getting paid. Their identification documents have been taken from them. And that happens to trafficking victims as well, is that they take all ID. Anything that they have that could identify them or connect them back home so that they could be independent, they remove from them. Same with labor trafficking, so that they're rendered helpless in society. And if you kind of spotting some of those things, especially when you're out traveling and a girl is super submissive, she will not make eye contact, the other person speaks for her, that's a red flag. And we encourage you, never interject yourself into that situation, because it could put that person in harm. But call 911 and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Would you check it out? Because law enforcement is going to know a whole lot more about that situation. Maybe they'd been looking for that person. We just don't know.
Right.
But just knowing that what some of these signs are will help equip you to someone who's currently in that situation. But dialing it back even further is what we just talked about of being that safe place for someone.
Yep.
And letting them tell their story and maybe saying, hey, well, if you ever need a place to stay, I can help you out. I can connect you with this resource. Or letting your kids' friends crash on your sofa. Maybe making sure that they're allowed at your table every week. Man, some of this stuff is so simple. So simple. Being that safe harbor is so powerful.
Yeah, it's very community centered, which is the way that it's what we need to get back to. And it takes a village is a saying you hear a lot, but man, there's evil out there, and you got to be aware of it. You got to know. I think it's important. We say it often. You gotta know your enemy, and this is an enemy, I think, to any society. We can't allow it to exist. It would be immoral to do so. So I guess kind of in conclusion, do you want to just kind of summarize what HB 68, just one more time, briefly summarize what kind of changes that makes, and then the best things we can do going into the legislative session, and also when that begins, because some people may not know.
Legislative session in Alaska begins in January, but you can call and write your representative now, and it will be included with that. Okay. So it's still effective. The bill will be hopefully moving during the session, which runs from January to May. So you'll be able to see some of the activity, have opportunities for public testimony to hear you verbally. But again, your letters of support that you could do today is very helpful. And the House Bill 68 establishes the crime of sex and human trafficking, and it thoroughly defines them of what they are, so that it's not confused with prostitution. It elevates that crime. It provides justice for victims. One thing that I didn't mention before is that it also cleans the record of someone who has been previously convicted of prostitution who was indeed trafficked. They can then go to the Department of Law and say, I'd like this, my record expunged because I was a victim of trafficking. They can have their record cleaned up, and that is transforming. So the bill does that as well. It's not just focusing on the crime, but also there's a few elements to provide for the victims. This is not a one-size-fits-all for trafficking, but it definitely establishes the framework for the crime of trafficking that we so desperately need in Alaska.
There you go. Well, awesome. You have anything else on that you want to make sure people know? Does that wrap it up pretty
trust
good?
Your gut. Trust your gut. Teach your kids. Every time, my oldest is 20, and every time I get a little bit nervous because she's outside of my home and she's starting to travel the world and do different things. My friend reminds me, she said, Sarah, you're not raising lambs. You're raising lions. Teach them to be lions, not lambs. And when I have that mindset, that tells me I'm going to equip my children for what they're facing. I'm going to teach them to be that safe place for someone, to be their defense. You always defend that person next to you. They may not be your responsibility, but they kind of are. If they're in your sphere of influence, they're in your circle, whether you know them or not, they may need someone to come to their defense. You be that person. And also equipping them of what they're going to come across online. This is so important.
Yeah.
My 11-year-old son is a little techie, and if I were to take his iPad, it would be the end of the world. But I also know he's going to need those skills, so I'm not going to take his iPad away, but I am going to give him the tools about what to watch for. I'm going to give him boundaries to keep him safe because he's still a boy, meaning when he's playing his games, you can play the games and chat with your brother online, but there are other people who want to trick you and do harm, and they won't be a boy your age. And so I give him those tools and say, okay, I'm going to let you continue to play this fun farm game. I'm going to limit your time, But I also want to give you the tools to know that there are people who want to harm you, and they're going to trick you. So I think there's a fine balance in that of saying, here's the tools to help you be shrewd, help you be wise to your surroundings. That situational awareness that you teach, we can teach our kids that online. I need to learn that more of that myself, right? How many of us have had, your password was scalped by someone on some website, right? Same thing, but we need to give those tools to our kids early because they get it. They're running across a lot of stuff that we're clueless about. But also in their sphere of, hey, you know that one person that you're just not so sure about, but they just want to hang out with you because you're the kid that has extra snacks that you're going to share, right? Maybe you ought to take a few more because they may be the kids who are finding you as their safe place.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I think that's a good, strong note to end on. I appreciate the time you've spent and also being willing to come up and sit in person with us. That's means a lot. So, and it shows how important you take this issue and getting it out there. So, again, make sure you contact your local representatives and senators. Oh, actually, quick question on that. There is a Senate bill version of this.
There is.
Do you reference that when you talk to a senator, or does it not matter? You can still do.
Well, that bill doesn't have the changes that my House bill has to strengthen it.
Okay, so they are different bills then.
It started out as the same bill, but I made a lot of structural changes that we talked about that are only in the House bill.
Okay, so reference House Bill 68.
Yes.
Okay, cool. But you can still send that to a senator, your local senator.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. I will have all this linked below. We'll touch bases afterwards and make sure I got my links straight. And then I'll also link how to find your representative and make sure you listeners have that. That'll be kind of more specific to Alaska. But I do encourage everyone listening outside of Alaska to follow through on the things that Representative Sarah was recommending. Go figure out what your state's doing, how you can get involved, and make sure that the right things are being pursued in the legislation in your local state. So thanks again for being willing to come on. It was a good conversation, and I think it's a valuable conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.